Hi, welcome back guys to part 5 of this awesome tutorial series where we learn about the basics of Unity programming and Unity itself. Now this tutorial series being a little bit ad hoc, our game will evolve as we build it and as we learn a couple new functions. Now, there are plenty of different ways of starting when you're starting code. But before we even touch it, I like to plan out, I like to draw out things. So let's grab my favorite tool, Paint. Now having Paint out, we're going to talk about what game we're going to create. Now we're going to be cubes, right? And this cube is going to collect coins, right? And the cube will be able to move these directions, so X, Y, and Z. And there'll be enemies, and the enemies will try to ram you. And that's about it. You'll also be able to cut off line of sight, maybe, or something cool like that. There's going to be some way that you can either kill or distract these enemies. And so that's my game idea. And with that in mind, let's start programming. So when we started off, we added the name, attack speed, dead, health, and so on. However, our character is not right now going to have an attack, and I don't want to overbear this with too many variables. So let's just grab all the information that is actually needed for the character to move. And we can keep int and health and dead and so on. But right now, let's just kind of move this like so. And that way, we don't really look too far into the future, but have what's at hand. So let's make a couple variables that we know we're going to use. And there's two ways of making a character move. One way would be to use the character controller, which does everything fine, except it doesn't allow to have square or a random collider. A character controller is a capsule collider. And that works, except our character is going to be a cube. And for the purpose of this video, I was thinking that we should create our own character controller. And that way we can learn a little bit more in depth about what's happening behind the character controller, as well as playing around with some variables of rigid body and so on. So let's get started. The first thing that we will want is probably for our character to move at a certain speed. So we're going to do a public, because we would want to edit this inside of the inspector. I don't know how we would call this. Maybe if the enemy sees you, you'll slow down. But we're not really going to call it from another script. We just want to see it in the inspector. So speed, and we're going to make it equal to 10. And then we're going to have gravity, how much it's going to be pushed down towards Earth. And so that's also going to be public. So maybe, there's a power up and you lose gravity. So let's just keep that into account and let's make that public. And we can also adjust it if something's, wrong. And let's see, and let's do a max velocity change. Since we're using rigid body, we'll need to be able to accelerate from 0 to our speed, but we don't want to exceed a certain speed. So let's make that also public. Since we don't know what the sweet spot is, we're just going to make it everything equal to 10, float. And let's make this max velocity change. We're gonna make it equal to 10 as well. Okay, now with that down, we're gonna hit save, and we're gonna go into Unity, and this is our little test scene, and we're gonna start making our scene, right? So we're gonna have game object, because we're gonna create some objects. Game object, 3D object, cube. And this is gonna be our ground. Let's go here, make it 100, and 100 here. And give it some color. So to give anything color without this default material, as you see, it's blank. To change that, you let's make a folder first. So let's, in our assets, right click, create folder, and put colors. Oh. And I'm going to right click here, create, and we're going to create a material. So if you click on the game object, you see default material. We're going to actually create our own. So create material. And this is going to be called ground. And now we can drag the ground material onto our ground, either by dragging it into the hierarchy or into the inspector. And it closes up, and we can open it, and now we can change it to a lovely green, but not too piercing, right? Maybe we can do an orange. That looks nice, doesn't it? So having that set, we can now make our player. Game object, 3D, cube, and we can double click on our player and drag him out of the ground, like so. And we see that this is called cube. And to rename these, you can either go here and type in whatever, so ground, or you can click here and you can click, double click for Mac, click and wait, click again for Windows, and type player. And that way we have a little bit of distinction. Now, as I said earlier, everything here is like a folder where you can drag and drop things into one another. And since we're not going to create necessarily a camera script right now, and we want to test this out, we can parent the camera to the player. And by parenting, this is going to be the child, and we're dragging and dropping into the other folder, the game object, and this is now the parent, and this is now the child, the parent being on top. So now our camera's here. Now how do we efficiently move this camera to our game object? Well, you do that by either trying to position it, but when it's too far away, you can just click on it and you see these X, Y, and Z. As you said, this is for, as I said earlier, it's for positioning at a certain point. And if you zero it out, it's a 0, so it's in the center. It's at the 0 point relative to the parent object. So if I move the parent object, right, this is changing, but the main camera is staying at 0, and we want that. So now we have the camera here, but let's position it out. So we're going to move it here, move it up, out, maybe a little up, out, up, like so. Go into game view, very just beautiful. We can move it up and we can hit the rotate key, and we can make it look down. And now we have a perfect view of what's in front of us, and we are ready to roll. Now in our player, let's assign the player script. As you see, everything that is public is here, and our health is 0. And the reason why that is, and it's not some weird number, is undefined variables that are public are the default. And that works for the basic, it's not always true, but it works for booleans that are not set are equal to false. In the inspector, they're public, and so on. So with that said, let's go to video 6, where we continue our tutorial and we actually start adding some functionality with these variables and with our scene setup.